one, number 371. 371, A Passion for Thee. It's a good thing to have, isn't it? A Passion for Thee. 371, we'll sing both verses. Set my heart, O dear Father, on Thee and Thee only. Give me a thirst for Thy presence divine. Lord, keep my focus on loving Thee wholly. Purge me from earth, turn my heart after Thine. A passion for Thee, O Lord, set a fire in my soul, and a thirst for my God. Hear Thou my prayer, Lord, Thy power impart, not just to serve, but to love Thee with all of my heart. And the last, verse 2. Father, fill with Thy Spirit and fit me for service. Let love for Christ every motive inspire. Teach me to follow in selfless submission. Be Thou my joy and my heart's one desire. A passion for Thee, O Lord, set a fire in my soul, and a thirst for my God. Hear Thou my prayer, Lord, Thy power impart, not just to serve, but to love Thee with all of my heart. Amen. Excellent singing, Pastor.
Thank you, Lance, for jumping in there. Not sure what's going on with that, but this morning we did something with the audio, and they couldn't hear hardly anything. And then tonight we had trouble getting it going on, so it's a good thing that we're not a professional video services church, isn't it? Because we would be losing a whole lot of business right now. But I'm hopefully that you guys are able to find back where we are. We're leaving the camera point at the screen because Lance is getting ready to come on up in a minute. But we are going to just jump ahead. We've blown up the whole schedule tonight, so everything's all out of whack and out of order here. And I believe at this point that we probably should have Steve come in and if anybody has something they want to put in the offering for tonight. I probably should have told you why to come in so you could grab that too, but so that he can grab that. But if you have something that you would like to put in the offering, we'll go ahead and collect it now rather than at the end, because when the guys slip out in a moment to go count that way you have it there. So if you have something you'd like to drop in, you can go ahead and just wave at Steve and he'll get that to you. Things tonight going on pretty much as they have been. Looking forward for things. Good to see some people back tonight. Good to see you this evening. Hope that this week goes well. We're talking about all kinds of stuff coming up and making plans for things that are going on. If you are having things go on and checking on stuff or not sure how things are going or any like that, please ask. This time, communication is going to be really important to make sure we all know what's going on and can keep up with each other. So if you do have something, then that would be something just to ask, call. I will not be in the office tomorrow because it's Memorial Day, and get that time off and get to spend some time with the family out in the garage cleaning up and preparing for baby arrival. So that will be fun. No, the baby's not staying in the garage. We have to make space to put stuff in the garage so the baby can come into the house. But doing some planning and things like that going on there. But certainly if we have something we can do for you or just answer questions, let us know. Next Sunday morning, Melissa, good to see you tonight. Your mom's still going to be off next week, hopefully? Yes. She's working today? Yes. You haven't seen her, though. How's she working? So you don't know how work went today for her yet, do you? No. We assume it went well. We'll pray that it goes well for Miss Julie. But next Sunday morning, we are planning on having Melissa's baptism after our morning service. So make sure that you are expecting that. Maybe set the timer for lunch back 5 or 10 minutes just to give time for be able to have some time out there and just rejoice in her and what God is doing in her life. So good. Lance, come on ahead. Lance is going to play a song for us before we get into the message, a song that reminds us of what Christ has given us. Oh, love that will not let me go. Oh, cross that lifts up my head. I'm trying to remember what verses that we had, and just reminding us of what God has given to us, that we are submitting to Him and realizing that the gifts that He has given us, the things that He has blessed us with, are of great benefit to us. So I hope this song is a blessing as he plays, Oh, love that will not let me go. Thank you, Lance. Looking forward to that time when we will see the culmination of all that God has planned for us. We get to know His love firsthand. We get to see those things that He is doing, the completion of what He has planned for them all. I enjoy that line on that song. I trace the rainbow through the rain and know the promise is not vain, that morn shall, and I just forgot the word, morn shall better be is the idea. That whatever I see going on, that the things that I see happening in what's happening in my life right now, and I say, oh, this is not fun, this is not pleasant, I don't want a rainstorm right now. I know that God has something planned through it all, and that He's working and accomplishing His good and His will through that. So thank you for playing that for us this evening, Lance. 1 Samuel. Chapter 8, I feel like we're not quite ready for it yet because I was not paying attention to the first part, but yet it's that time. And so go ahead and grab your Bibles and turn to 1 Samuel chapter 8. Speaking of not yet time for, as we get into chapter 8, we feel like we're ready for the story of Samuel to really take off. And we're getting ready to see what God is going to do with this man. And we saw him as a boy. We saw him in the house, the tent of meeting. We watched God began to speak to him and through him, and Israel recognized him as a prophet. We saw that after 20 years of time that Israel began to return to the Lord in a great revival that happened in Mizpah. And verse 1 of chapter 8 starts off, it came to pass when Samuel was old.
And as I was reading this chapter, getting ready for it, it's like, no! Because have you ever listened to a story and you just know now it's going to get good? And now things are set up to be where we want them to be? And that's kind of where we left off at the end of chapter 7, right? Israel, they had, under the priests, they had not been seeing the sacrifices done as God intended. They had lost the ark. Things went downhill. The glory of the Lord has departed. Now the ark has been returned, and they finally say, yes, we want to follow God. Samuel, we want to do what God has said. We've put away the Balaam and the Ashtaroth. We're turning from those things. We're returning to the Lord. Now the Philistines come up against them. God gives them a great victory. And you're like, yes, we finally got to the good chapter about what's going to happen in Israel. And already the story of Samuel is winding down. That was really short. There was a lot more there that could have been said. There was a lot more that could have been going on. But God knew that the parts of Samuel's life that we have are what we needed to know. And it made me think about this as I'm thinking through and studying this. Why would the only real highlight that we have of Samuel's ministry is chapter 7 when all of Israel returns to the Lord? And you say, oh, well, what about the time when God began to speak and they began to see that there was a prophet? And there's still more to come. This isn't the last chapter about Samuel, but this is the beginning of the transitioning out of Samuel's time. And over the next few chapters, you're going to watch Samuel go down in his importance out all the way to his time of death. And you're going to watch the next major character in the book come up. And here's Samuel, but Samuel's job really, as we see it, is to take Israel from where they were at the end of the book of Judges and bring them into what's going to be introduced here tonight, into the time of the monarchy, into the time of the kings. We'll read through a big chunk of the chapter just to get us started off on what's going on, and then we'll come back and look at it. 1 Samuel 8, starting at verse 1, I'll read. And it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second Abiah. These were judges in Beersheba. And his sons walked not in his ways, but turned aside after lucre, and took bribes, and perverted judgment. Then all the elders of Israel gathered themselves together, and came to Samuel unto Ramah, and said unto him, Behold, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. But the thing displeased Samuel when they said, Give us a king to judge us. And Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said unto Samuel, Hearken unto the voice of the people in all that they say unto thee. For they have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. According to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of Egypt, even unto this day, wherewith they have forsaken me and served other gods, so do they also unto thee. Now therefore hearken unto their voice, howbeit yet protest solemnly unto them, and show them the manner of the king that shall reign over them. Father, as we look at this passage tonight, help us to see what's going on. Help us to consider the people and their choice, Samuel and where he was, and what you were doing in the nation of Israel during this time. Help us to consider us in times of transition, in times of rejection, in times when things aren't going the way that they should have gone, to consider whether or not we are following your plans or what we want. Help us to be honest with ourselves, that you might be glorified in our life. In Christ's name I pray, amen. You see different groups popping up here. And if you remember, as we were talking about on Wednesday nights, talking about Bible study and things you're looking for, and we're going to get more into that in the next 3 weeks. But one of the things, if you're reading narratives, is it's important to identify who is participating in a story. Who is part of what's going on in here? How many groups are taking place in this story that we've seen so far? Groups may be one person, they may be many people. How many different positions did we see in the section that we just read? Well, let's start off and just start naming them. Who is one person group that we saw in what we just read? Samuel, of course. Samuel, right? Samuel's the one who started off. Okay. Did we see anybody else participating in this story? Well, the two sons were mentioned. The two sons were alluded to, but we don't really see them going on. But they were right off the bat, and they're kind of a catalyst for what's going on. And we'll see the part that they play, how they mix in. But we don't necessarily see them as part of the story, more just referenced. But they're definitely in there. Okay, the people, right? The people of Israel. They're going on. So it's Samuel and the people of Israel. Anybody else, or is that it? The Lord. The Lord's taking part in this story. Anybody else, or is that it? Yes, the elders, the leaders of Israel that are representing of the nation of Israel. So we have Samuel, we have the people of Israel, we have the Lord. Anybody else? I want to stop making you uncomfortable. There's nobody else. I just wanted to see, because you see that person, like anytime he says there's somebody else, there has to be somebody else. We keep on looking. You want to keep on looking, but that's really all there is in this story. You see three parties involved in what's going on here. You see Samuel starting off, and as Lance mentioned that the sons are there. The sons are kind of the catalyst for what gets going on, but really it's even beyond that Samuel gets old. How old is Samuel? That's always the question. When somebody says they're old, how old do they mean? Oh man, they're so old. They're like 40s. Oh, they're in their like 200s. How old is old? We don't know exactly how old Samuel was. We do know he had sons, and we know that those sons were old enough that he appointed them, he made them judges over Israel. This word judges is kind of a callback to remind us where we are in Israel's timeline. Okay? So we have, if we're looking at how things progress and looking at Bible times and studying how, especially through the Old Testament, it's neat to see how God works in people and how God interacts with and reveals himself and leads and kind of progresses down through different situations. Israel came out as a nation out of Egypt, and they went to Mount Sinai, and God established what's generally seen as a theocracy. A monocracy would be one king. So there's one king. You have different other ocracies. If you study history and government, things like that, you can find them. I don't remember them all. But a theocracy, theos is God, so it's ruled by God. God had set up that he was the ruler over Israel. He was the one who gave the law at Mount Sinai. He was the one who instituted the priesthood. Remember, what do the priests do? The priests are the one who go before God on behalf of the people. The priests were not the rulers. They were the ones who interceded to God on behalf of the people. They were the ones who offered the sacrifices. Okay? Now, during that time, you see at the very beginning from Mount Sinai on, who was the leader in Israel? At Mount Sinai, not all the way to this time, obviously, but who was the leader of Israel during when they went to Mount Sinai when the law was received? Moses. Moses. One of the things that you see Moses doing is he would sit and the people would come to him and they would bring their disputes, and Moses would judge between them. Miss Debbie and Miss Vicky have a dispute about, I don't know, something. You know, where are we going to sit for Sunday service? One says we need to sit on this row, the other one says we need to sit on this row, and that's petty. They wouldn't argue over that. But there's something going on. Who would they come to? They would come to Moses, and Moses would judge between them. And if you recall that Moses' father-in-law said, this is way too much. There's estimates that there's 4-6 million people in Israel when they came out of Egypt. And Moses was the singular judge for them all. And so Moses' father-in-law said, why don't you appoint other people who can judge over the people, and anything that's too much, they'll bring it back to you. But there you see that idea of a judge being kind of loosely set up. Moses proceeds to turn over the reins to Joshua. You see, Joshua is the one who's more of a military leader in the conquest of Israel that goes on. After Joshua comes along, in your Bible, you go right into the book of Judges. And you start seeing this pattern where a judge would be raised up. And we think of the judges as being military deliverers, because that's what we often see in the book of Judges. But really, a judge was one who would mediate between people. They would make rulings on different disputes that are going on. Think of how we think of a judge today. The difference is that most of the time the judges were not ones that the people would be arrested by the police and hauled in before the judge. More often it would be kind of what we think of lawsuit type situations, where this person has wronged me, so I drag you and judge, discern between us who is right, who is obeying the law, and who is not. But this idea of a judge has been really firmly entrenched into the Jewish mindset because it goes all the way back to Moses coming out of Egypt. And they have this coming up. Samuel was considered to be a judge. And you saw that, we talked about that last week, that in the end of chapter 7, it talks about how Samuel judged Israel. Samuel judged Israel, and he judged on this circuit. And if we line up our timelines, and we're coming right out of the book of Judges, you see that Eli was even referenced as a judge. There's no break in this sense of that there's a judge in Israel. Is there anything unusual about Samuel then in verse 1, making his sons judges over Israel? Is there anything unusual about Samuel choosing his sons to be judges over Israel? I have one shaking his head, yes. What? You don't see a man appointing the judge. What Lance said is in the book of Judges, you see God as the one who appoints the judges. The Lord raised up a judge when the time was needed, when a judge was needed. And you never see a father put his son in the position of being a judge. In fact, when Gideon was the judge, he defeated the Midianites, and Israel said, "You be a king over us, and your sons, you and your sons after you will be a king over us." And Gideon said, No, the Lord will rule over you. And they wanted Gideon to be that one who would set up a descendancy of rulers, and Gideon said no. So here you see Samuel, and this is unusual, this is different. Why would this be the case? Samuel's getting old. He probably realized that there was a need for someone to come after him. And who is the easiest one to set up, to train, to equip for being the ones that are right there with you? And why Samuel would choose his sons to be judges, not exactly sure. Now you note at the end of verse 2, they were judges in Beersheba. Beersheba is way in the south. Way in the south. So again, if you remember that Shiloh and Samuel was on his route in, where was his route? Gilgal, Mizpah, and Bethel, in the middle of Israel, in this area. Then he would come down to Ramah, where he lived, and Bethel is all in the middle. Beersheba would be way in the south. Way in the south. When you read and you're talking in the Old Testament about the extent of Israel, it would mention from Dan to Beersheba. Dan is way in the north, Beersheba is way in the south. It would be akin to us saying from New York to L.A. Let's pick pretty far apart points in the country, and that's saying it's everything in there. So they weren't in the same area as him, but he appointed them to be judges with him, assuming that they would take over after him. How old was Samuel? He was old enough that his sons were old enough to be appointed judges, but he was also old enough that his sons had been judges long enough that their poor character was displayed. His sons walked not in his ways, verse 3, but they turned aside after lucre, after their own, what they're looking for, their own financial gain. They took bribes, and they perverted judgment. They twisted what they were supposed to do. Miss Debbie and Miss Vicky come with their dispute, and then Miss Vicky comes up and says, "Oh, and if you side on my side, here's an extra 20. And say, okay, let me listen. Oh, it doesn't matter, Miss Debbie, Miss Vicky, you're right. What's that? That's twisting judgment, because am I basing the judgment on how I'm supposed to judge? No, I'm basing it on what benefit I get out of it. And that's what his sons were known for. Does that sound familiar? That sounds similar to what the priest in Shiloh were doing. It sounds similar to what Hophni and Phinehas were doing, where they were coming up, but they weren't judges. They were doing this with the sacrifices. What can I get out of the sacrifices? Oh, you want to offer this to God? That's nice. I want this part, so I'm going to keep it for me. And you see them misusing and abusing the sacrifices. Here's Samuel's sons who are misusing and abusing their position as judges. And now you see the elders of Israel come to Samuel, and they said, behold, verse 5, thou art old, and thy sons walk not in thy ways. And you almost expect them to say, you need to train somebody else, or what's going on, and we're used to the judges, we need another judge. But they say, no, we need a king. A king. What's the difference between a judge and a king? You see that in how they describe in verse 5, they say, make us a king to judge us like all the nations. If we jump all the way down towards the end of the chapter, verse 19 and 20, nevertheless the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, nay, but we will have a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. They're looking at three things for this king. One, that's what we see everybody else has. Two, we're looking for the judge that's going to come on. But three, we're looking for someone who's going to go out and fight our battles. Why would that be a thing right now? Why would that be a thing at this point in Israel's history? They have been fighting battles for a long time, haven't they? I mean, if you go back to Egypt, once they finally got out of the wilderness wanderings, even at the end of Moses' time, they were fighting battles. Even in the wilderness wandering, they were fighting battles. Then Joshua comes and there's the conquest of Canaan, they're fighting battles. Then the judges' times, they're fighting battles. They have nations invading against them. Why would this be a thing right now? Possibly because of the Philistines. They're seeing a consistent army, but they've seen that before. That doesn't seem to be necessarily a motivation for them that's different than what they would have. That's not something that they would say, right now things have changed and we need a military leader. They've needed and they've had military leaders for long times to come. Now, granted, the military leaders have not been the trained soldier that you normally think of as being a military king. Who led the battle against the Philistines that we see thus far? You don't see a named military leader in the book of 1 Samuel thus far. What about in Judges? What were the judges? How many of the judges were military leaders? Some of them were. Some of them were. You see about Othniel, who was a military leader. You read about Jephthah, who was known as a mighty man of valor. But then you see Gideon, who's hiding off in the wine press, squishing 8 grapes. You read about Deborah, who was a judge, and she wasn't even going to go out to battle. And you see the judges were not military leaders primarily thus far. So maybe they're looking for someone, we want a big, strong king who's going to be our warrior leader. But it doesn't seem that the desire for the king is because we need a military leader and that's a new thing. It's definitely not that we need a judge and that's a new thing, because they had judges who were not kings. But you see this idea that we mentioned in that very last verse that we read, verse 20 of 1 Samuel chapter 8, that we may be like all the nations. We may be like all the nations. Is Israel like all the nations? No, why not? God chose them as His specific people. Going back to the time of Abraham, God had said, I will bless them that bless you, I will curse them that curse you. In thee shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, and you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. I will multiply your descendants after you. I will give you this land. Everywhere you see, it's yours, and I am your God. He then goes in the time, as we mentioned with Moses, and he establishes this covenant with the people. And he is their God, and they are his people. And he says, and you read through in some of the places in Exodus and Leviticus, that he did not deal this way with other nations. He did not call other nations. You see them get into Joshua, and he said that you are my people that I have called. These nations have turned, they have rejected me. They are not my people. I want you to go in, and this is your land. They have no part in this inheritance that is yours. God had called Israel as his people, as his nation. So what were they doing in essence when they said, we want to be like the other nations? They were dismissing what God had done for them. They were getting away what God had done for them. You hear stories about kids who try to do that because the parents are just, I don't know, maybe a little bit over the top of what the kids want, or maybe not in quite the way the kids want. Kid turns 15, and parents say, oh, great, you got a driver's license. You can drive our old, and I'm going to pick a really old car that my mom really liked growing up, 1980s something, wood panel Jeep Wagoneer. My mom always wanted a Woody, a wood panel Jeep Wagoneer. Never got one. And I can tell you if she had got one, that us kids would have been mortified to drive it. And sometimes we would think of it like that, oh, they want to give us something, and oh, here's the privilege that you have of being a Clark, is you get to drive this car that your mom really likes. But there's no desire. You're like, man, I really don't want my mom looking out for me in that way, because that car it's not a cool car. I'm going to instead go over and hang out with my friends who have cool cars. And in doing so, what did I just do? I removed myself from the place where I had a car that was mine to be able to be used because I didn't like it, because it didn't appeal to me, because it wasn't something that was interesting for me. And sometimes we find ourselves doing that, and that seems to be exactly what Israel is doing here. We're not looking for what God has given us. Yeah, God's given us great things. Yeah, God's done great things for us, but we're not really interested in that. And that seems to be their mindset going into this. Not primarily, we need a judge. They already had judges. Not primarily, we need a king to fight for us. They had people that would fight for us. We're not satisfied with what God has given us, so we want something different. Why then did they come at this time? The reasons that they said in verse 5, Samuel, you're old. Samuel, your leadership has been much valued and much appreciated. Thank you for that. You're about to retire. So you're not going to be around anymore. Your sons, they're no good. They're not judges that we want. They're twisting the judgments that they should be doing. They're not doing what is right. We know that. We see that. And so we're not interested in what they have. So this is a good time for us to say, let's put in our plan into action. Let's get a king. Let's get a king. So here's party one position. The Israelites, we want a king. Who did they say this to? To Samuel. To Samuel. Samuel, you're the one that, well, you've already picked the next judges. You seem to be in a place where you're speaking not just to God as the priest who offered sacrifices for us last time, not just as the judge who judges over us, but we know you're also the prophet who speaks to us for God. You're really the one who goes between us and God. So here's the deal, Samuel. We want a king. How did Samuel respond to that? Verse 6, the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. The idea displeased. It was evil in his sight. It was something that he saw was wrong. Why would it be wrong? Why would Samuel think that it was wrong for the people to want a king? Here is what has been going on, and now the people want to change. Here, and I'm sure that he knew the feeling of the people. I'm sure this wasn't something that, as he had been traveling around judging in his circuit, that this is the first time he had ever heard of this. This is not likely that this is something that Samuel's completely caught off guard. Whoa, really? Wow, where did this come from? Because you have to, this is all of Israel coming together, verse 4, right? All the elders of Israel gathered themselves together. Samuel's been judging in among them for years now. He started judging as a young man. He's now old. You know he had heard whispers about as he's getting old, what's going to happen next. But the fact that they would all gather together and say, Samuel, this is what we want. Samuel said, this is not right. This is not what's right. How far did Samuel's thinking go with this? Verse 7, the Lord said to Samuel, you listen to them because they have not rejected you, but they've rejected me. Based on that, it's pretty safe to assume that Samuel felt this as a rejection of himself. Put yourself in that position, okay? Boom, you're now the one who's taken over your business that's been going on for hundreds of years, okay? You've got the big sign out in front. Our job, founded 1789 or 1643 or whenever. This has been around forever. Out here in Tucson, I know there's nothing like that that's been around this long, but just picture with me. It's been going on for a long time. You've got the pictures of all the past bosses on the wall, and there they all are. And you are now the next one that's coming along. And now it's getting close to your turn to retire, and all of your employees come up to you and say, yeah, you're getting ready to retire, so we want a new kind of leadership. Wait a second. All of these people before me have gone in this way. What have I done that says that you guys don't want this anymore? How have I failed what has been entrusted to me? How have I been insufficient in the job that I was given? How am I not one who would make you excited for the next one who's going to continue? And I'm handing off like, oh man, we're going to be so sad to see Samuel go. But the next one, man, as great as Samuel was, can you imagine what the person he's trained is going to be like? He's poured himself into these people, and we're going to see how that happens. And there's nothing there. Samuel, who has seen God do great things in the nation of Israel, and would by this point certainly think that the people would trust him, who would say the people would come to him and say, Samuel, okay, maybe the sons aren't doing what they're supposed to do. Samuel, we need something else. What should we do? How would you guide us? What can we do before you're done as judge? How can we prepare for the time after you're gone? No, they come, they've already got their plan worked out. And Samuel, based upon how God encourages him, Samuel took this very personally. Was Samuel right to be hurt that the people rejected him? Was Samuel right to take this as an affront to his leadership? First thought would be, oh yeah. He had poured himself into these people. He had invested in them. We have the story of Samuel starting off when he was a baby. His entire life, he had been trained to be this one who had led the people, who had spoken for God, who had spoken to God. He had done all this, and now at the end of his life, it seems that the people have no regard for what he's done. And that sense of investing in people who will turn around and despise what you have done, who will make little of what you have done, who've shown that they have no value for what you have done for them, that's painful. That's painful. Parents who have kids who have had something like that happen, employers who have gone out of your way for your employees, and you've done something and then they turn around and walk off just because the next guy will give them 25 cents more an hour. You're like, that hurts. Do you not realize all the things that I've gone out of my way to do for you? And Samuel takes this personally. But should Samuel have taken this personally? I remember, and over years of pastoring and working with people and investing in them, I've been cautioned a few times about when people leave the church, it should hurt. And if it doesn't hurt you as the pastor when people leave your ministry, then you may need to check and see, did you care enough for them? Were you really a pastor to them? Because if you have poured yourself into them and then they leave, then you realize that here's something that you have spent time on that is not there. Here's someone that you have prayed for and you have sought good for them from God, and now they're gone, and they say that should be the case. But I think there's also a sense that if we're trying to get people to follow God, and we understand that we're working with sinful people, that there should be maybe not an expectation, and we don't want to be cynical. Out of this group here, 15% won't be here in 2 years from now or something like that. You don't want to be cynical or negative on it, but the reality is people are sinful people. Should Samuel have known that the people would turn from God? Well, look back at what Samuel had seen in his life. Yes. Should Samuel have been pointing the people to God as their leader? And should he have realized that this rejection was not of him, but of God? And this is one of those things that I'm not going to say Samuel is wrong, but I would say that if we find ourselves in this kind of place, we need to think through this. If I'm trying to lead somebody for God and they reject God, should that be a major end-of-the-world shutdown moment for me? You hear all the sayings, it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. And then you tell that to somebody who just went through a difficult breakup. We were engaged, we were supposed to be married on this coming Friday, and they said no, and they gave the ring back. And you're like, oh, well, it's better to have loved them and lost them than have never loved them at all. They're not going to believe you right at that moment, right? Because the pain is still there. It's very real. We're emotional beings. We commit to each other. We form those emotional relationships with each other. And when those are torn apart, there is going to be pain there. But that pain, that difficulty can lead to problems, can't it? Because then what's the stereotype of a difficult, our relationship is over, what am I going to go do? I'm going to go, spend the next 2 weeks, I'm never going to leave my house except to go pick up another 6 gallons of ice cream and eat it more. And I'm going to pull in on myself, and I'm going to focus on my loss and the fact that I was rejected and the fact that this thing that I had invested in was not going to go the way that I thought it was going to go. And I'm putting myself in a position to where the investment that I did was for my benefit. Oh, wait. The investment I did was for my benefit. Because it was for their benefit, and they threw it away. Yeah, that's painful, but that's not the end of the world. If the investment was for God, God knew what was going to happen. And sometimes we can get really easily discouraged when we invest in people and they reject our investment. And you know what a temptation is for us? Is that I'm never going to get hurt like that again. I'm never going to put myself in a position to have that happen again. I was listening to a thing a couple weeks ago about disciple making, and the guy that was teaching said, if you are looking to build disciple makers, you need to prepare them for the pain that comes when people walk away. Because people are going to walk away. Because not everybody that you spend time witnessing to is going to get saved or is even going to be your friend. And can you lose friendships that you thought with people you thought were your friend because you were willing to say, I think the most important thing I can do for them is tell them about Christ. No, I'm not saying that, okay, hey, we've been friends for 3 weeks. Great, I've got you right where I want you. Bible, 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 and just beat them over the head and show them that the only reason that you were their friend is because you were trying to manipulate them into what you wanted them to believe in the first place. There's a balance that has to be walked with being a true friend and being one who will present Christ to them. And that's a difficult, because if it's, oh, no, I really don't want to lose that friendship, so I'm not going to talk to them about Christ. But, if friendship's not important because, if they're not going to believe in the next 2 weeks, I'll jump to the next friend because it's just easier that way. And where is that balance of showing them that I care about them? But my caring about them of necessity means that I care about their eternal state. And if you find yourself building those kind of relationships with people, when those people say, no, I'm not interested, forget you, I thought you were my friend, but if you keep talking about God, I don't ever want to talk to you again. That's going to hurt. And we build those emotional connections with people only to watch them ripped apart. And when that happens, we have to go back. Just like the Lord did for Samuel here. They've not rejected you, they've rejected me. At that point, too, is a good time just to consider the rejection that Christ went through for us. That's a whole nother topic. We're not going to get into that right now. But how much it hurts us if one person rejects us. And how many billions of people have rejected what Christ has done for them. But Samuel finds himself now in that position. The people say, we want a king. It's a good time. It's a convenient time. We're not interested in what God's done for us. We're despising the place that God has put us. Instead, we want to be like everyone else. Samuel says, ouch, that hurts. How could you reject me like that? God, it's evil what they're doing, isn't it? And God says, Samuel, the rejection is not yours. The rejection is against me. Go and plead with them to say no, but if they want a king, then give them a king. Hearken unto them, verse 9. Howbeit protest solemnly. Samuel, verse 10, told all the words of the Lord unto the people that asked of him a king, and they said, this will be the manner of the king that shall reign over you. Just as an interesting note, the manner that it's talking about, that says there in verse, verse 11? Yes, verse 11. I think it says in verse 9 as well. There is, when God says to Samuel, tell them of the manner of the people, that's the judgment. That's the same word that's back in verse 3, where Samuel's sons perverted judgment. That's this idea of ruling, of making a judgment, of doing the just thing, of doing rightly, of governing over them. This is the kind of way, so it's not saying this is not the personality of the king. This is not just the way it is. This is the way that your king will rule over you. This is the way that your king will judge you. He will take your sons and appoint them for himself, for his chariots and be his horsemen, and some shall run before his chariots. He will appoint them captains, verse 12. He will use them as military. Verse 13, he'll take your daughters to be confectionaries and cooks and be bakers, and he will take your fields and your vineyards and your olive yards, even the best of them given to his servants. He'll take the tenth of your seed. Verse 16, he'll take your men servants and your maid servants, your goodliest young men and your asses. He will, verse 17, he'll take the tenth of your sheep. Verse 18, and ye shall cry out in that day because of the king which ye have chosen you. And the Lord will not hear you in that day. Okay, you want a king? Here's what a king does. A king uses his power for his benefit. That's the general way that kings rule. That old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. When you get a person who has that kind of power, they tend to, just because of the nature of man, use that power for themselves. You look at the history of the kings of Israel and Judah, and there were some godly kings who ruled according to God, and they followed God, and there were a lot of them that did not. You look at how they ruled. You might remember Rehoboam's speech. They said, Solomon, your father, was hard and difficult on us, and he oppressed us. Will you be nice to us? If you will, we will serve you. And he said, oh, I'm going to be so much worse. I'm going to be so much worse than what my father was. Israel, this is what's coming. You want that kind of king? Verse 19, nevertheless, the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel, and they said, nay, but we will have a king over us, that we may be like all the nations. God, you've given us this. God, you've put us in this place where we are your chosen people. You have blessed us. Yeah, we'd rather be like everybody else. I told stories about my brother. It's a year younger than me this morning. He's a better athlete than me. So I have to flip around and tell a story where I'm better than him tonight. Okay. What did people who wanted to make money in high school in South Carolina do? We cut grass. Because you may not realize this, but there are parts of the world where grass is everywhere, and you don't even have to water it, and it just grows. And if you don't mow it in 2 weeks, it's going to be up around your ankles and up to your knees, and it's crazy. And all you have to do to make money in South Carolina as a 15-year-old is go buy a lawnmower and knock on people's door and say, you want me to cut your grass? I bought a riding lawnmower on my dad's credit card at the beginning of the month. And within 3 weeks, I had paid off the entire riding lawnmower. And that was like a $999 Walmart riding lawnmower. Paid for college cutting grass. And I would go and I would cut this yard. And this is, again, back late 90s, right? So I have no idea what you can get for it nowadays. I look at the yard. I say, I can mow that in about an hour. Okay, I'll charge you $35 to cut your grass. Sure. So as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, yes, I was making $35 an hour cutting grass. Now, granted, that's not including the driving between time. It's how many jobs I get. I only work like 2 or 3 days a week because I couldn't get that many jobs because, everybody's out there cutting grass. But yeah, I would go cut grass for 6-8 hours. I'd make a couple $100. I'm getting more yards. I say, hey, Brother John, you want to go cut grass with me? We could do this. We could get even more yards. We can make even more money. I was like, and we could go, you can get yours, I can get going mine, and we can tag team these things. We can make all kinds of money. He's like, actually, our friend Michael, who's older, he's early 20s, mid-20s, he's got his own landscaping crews that he's running, and he's looking to hire guys to cut grass for him. And all my friends are working over there, so I'm going to go work with him, and I'm going to cut grass with him so I can hang out with all my friends. Because my brother, again, the very social one, the one who everybody gets connected with. And he's going to pay me $10 an hour. And I looked at him and I said, you're going to get $10 an hour to go work with your friends instead of getting closer to $30 an hour to come work with your brother. Yeah. It worked out well because my business didn't grow like I thought it was going to, and he would cut half my profits out. So that worked out well. Thank you, brother. But can you imagine that saying, I would rather be among these people and get so much less benefit just because I'm where I want to be than to see what I could get, what is being offered to me. And I'm not trying to say that was a sinful choice and he rejected me on that. Like I said, it worked out pretty well for me. But that mindset of, I can get this great benefit. Yeah, I don't really care about the benefit. I just want to be with who I want to be with. I want to be around my friends. I want to do what I enjoy doing. And you see that in Israel. Oh, yeah, God, we're your people. You would do great things for us. That's nice. We'd rather be like everybody else. Here's the people of God who despised the blessings of God and wonder what they wanted. Here's the prophet, judge, priest of God, who found himself hurt by what God's people were doing and had to be redirected in his thinking. But here's God. What is God's place in all of this? How is God working through all of this? Did God ever intend for there to be a king in Israel? What do you think? Did God ever intend for there to be a king in Israel? Go to Deuteronomy real quick. Deuteronomy chapter 17. Deuteronomy 17, verse 14. Deuteronomy is the recap of the law. Deuteronomy is that rehearsing of the covenant between God and Israel before they entered the promised land. The wilderness wanderings are done. They're looking as if it were right at the promised land. We're getting ready to go in. And then Moses comes and rehearses all the words of the law before Israel. Deuteronomy 17, verse 14. When thou art come into the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shalt possess it, and shalt dwell therein, and shalt say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me, thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee. Modern day translation. When you want a king, don't stop yourself. Take that king, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. And he goes into, here's the qualifications for the king. Interestingly enough, verse 16, 17, he shall not multiply horses to himself, neither shall he multiply wives unto himself. And then verse 18, when he becomes the king, he's supposed to write his own copy of the law. Okay, you're going to become king. What's the first thing that you need to do according to what God had said? He's going to write out. Remember, there's no computers. It's all by hand. He had to write out the law. Write it all out. So that he knew it, so he became familiar with it, so he had his own personal copy, because it's not like there were copies all over the place. Again, not all of the easy ways of reproducing stuff that we have nowadays. But way back in the law, under the time of Moses, God said, when you come into the land and you say, we want a king like everybody else, then that is time to put a king over you. Thou shalt in any wise do so. Do it. Whom the Lord will set over you. The Lord will pick this king for you. The Lord will choose this king. Did God know that there was going to be a king? God had not only knew there was going to be a king, the people are going to reject me and they're going to put their own king. God had planned into their law for there to be a king. And then if you think forward to David and how God established David's kingdom, and Christ will one day come and reign as king over Israel in fulfillment of that covenant made to David, you see, this was in God's plan all along. Was God caught off guard? No, God's never caught off guard. Was God frustrated in his intentions towards his people? Now, there's some who would argue, and there's no indication necessarily one way or the other, that the timing was wrong, that God was planning on David to be the first king, and the people jumped ahead, and that's why they got Saul and all the things that happened with Saul. And looking at how things worked, you could say, okay, circumstantially it seems that could have been the case. You did see that back in verse 8, verse 7, that God recognized that the people in choosing a king had rejected God. So it's not saying that God said, it's about time you guys caught on, finally, here you go, let's put a king in place. But God knew this was going to be happening. So here's the people. We want what we want because we're looking around us. We don't really care what God's doing for us. We want what we want because that's what we see around us. Here's Samuel, spending his whole life investing in these people and watching their lack of gratitude displayed, and they're ready to fast track past him into the next thing that they want. And here's God saying, yep, it's time. Let's go on with this. In the next few chapters, we'll see how this plays out, how the king is chosen. Where do we stand in how God is working in our lives? God, I know you're doing something, but I can't see it, so I want to do what I'm going to do over here, and this looks good to me, so let's go for it. God, I thought this is what I was supposed to be doing, and I poured myself wholeheartedly into it, and it did not end like I thought it was going to end. And this is painful, uncomfortable, it hurts, and it's not fun. We can't see what God is doing. Oh, sometimes we may be able to get glimpses of it. Sometimes we may be able to get a piece of what's going on. But if we could take anything away from this section of Israel's history right here, is to be reminded that God's plan is eternal. God's purpose is eternal. And the ups and downs that we may see right now, while they may be unsettling to us or undesirable to us, they're not something that's outside of God's control. They're not something that's outside of what God is doing. You see that word obey pop up a couple times. The people did not obey the voice of Samuel. They refused to obey the voice of Samuel, even when God spoke through Samuel and said, this is what we need to do. But God, the people may not have obeyed, but Samuel did. Samuel, in spite of his perception of rejection, did what God said. Can you imagine? Going back to the fiance broke up with me. Okay, this is what it would be like for Samuel at this point. My fiance broke up with me, and then they asked me to help them ask this other person out. Can I set my ex-fiance up with this other person and help them build a relationship with another person? How would that be? And we say, wow, but Samuel said, okay, God, this is what you want me to do. I will obey. I will go. I will do it. Following God is not easy. Following God is not always going to work out in the way that seems to make the best sense to us. And we say, oh, God's working all things for our good. Yes, but we don't always understand what is for our good. We don't always see what's going on as the good that we think it should be. But God is working. God is working. As we see God continue to go forward in what He's doing, remember, this is the story of how God is working. God is changing the nation of Israel, putting them in the place where He wants them to be. Here's where they were. Let's bring them to the next place. Here's what's happening. Let's put that person in place that's going to get them to the next thing. And watching this and seeing how this goes, and as we continue to see this narrative play out of the next king, the first king coming in, see God superintending over it all, seeing people who may not follow God's ways, being some people who do obey God's ways, and seeing God glorified through disobedience and through obedience. But how much greater it is for those who would say, no, Lord, we're going to obey you, we're going to follow you. Samuel said, this is not the way that I wanted to be, but God said, speak to them, I will. Lord, help us to be those who would obey. Help us not to get sidetracked by rejection, by frustrations. Help us not to take our eyes off of your blessings based on what we can see around us. Help us not to be put off what we know is right for what we think will be perceived as right by those around us. Help us to realize that our appeal should not be to man, but we should be seeking your favor and obeying you in our lives. Help us, Lord, as we would live, that we would keep our eyes fixed on you, not on the things that we see happening, not on our circumstances, but that we would be reminded that you are God and that we would seek you wholeheartedly. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. Number 639 in your hymnals is Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. That third stanza says, His word will not fail you, He promised. What God has promised is going to be true. What God has promised is going to come to pass. It's going to happen. So believe Him and all will be well. Trust in what God is doing. Then go to a world that is dying His perfect salvation to tell. Don't sit back and say, yeah, God's going to work it out, so I'll just kind of sit over here in my corner and wait for it. But be bold to tell. Be bold to invest in others. Be bold to be those that would say, I may have not had that turn out what I wanted, but that's not going to stop me from doing what God has said. Keep your eyes on Jesus and see the things around us that would not be quite as big deal as we've thought previously. Let's sing this as our closing song, as our reminders, our encouragement that as we go through this life, that we should keep our eyes fixed on Christ to see what He's doing. 6:39. Let's stand together as we would sing and just sing that last stanza. His word shall not fail you, He promised. Believe Him and all will be well. Then go to a world that is dying, His perfect salvation to tell. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in His wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of His glory and grace. Help us, Lord, this week to live for You and for Your glory. In Christ's name, amen. Thank you for coming. We'll see you on Wednesday, 7 o'clock. Keep right on going. Have a great week.